Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, continuing our discussion with Dr. Fahmy. Now, let's break it down one file. Now, the first file, let's talk about Libya, talking about presidential elections that should be taking place December 24th. Now, Libya received, the parliament received and issued the first law, law number 1 for 2021, stating the duties of the next president, talking about the procedures of applying the candidacy for running for office. Now, how would you assess the situation we're in Libya? We've been witnessing many efforts getting all the Libyan factions together, many even meetings and conferences and summits taking place in Egypt, now setting the road and the path ahead for the 24th of December elections. How positive or how cautious should we be regarding this process?
Well, I think it's a very important file, the Libyan one, because it has many ramifications on several regions also, not only Libya itself. You have Egypt, you have Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco even also played a major role, and the initial Sukhairat agreement was one of the first precursors to the current resolution in the Libyan case. What's really positive, I think, that there is now at least a roadmap for some sort of a way out of the conflict for Libya. The current government that's in place is also accepted by the major powers and by the international community. So that's very important. Its language is a very moderate language, so it's speaking clearly against terrorism, speaking clearly against threatening the peace and security of other countries, and they have called emphatically for other regional powers like Turkey, for instance, to withdraw and to not infiltrate its own sovereignty and borders with troops and with forces and so forth. So for Egypt and for the other countries in the region, I think it's a very positive message coming from this government. The elections also come at a time when the current of political Islam groups is losing ground, and we saw this in Tunisia recently. So the timing is also, I would say, right for countries like Egypt, who have been battling against this threat for a very long time, to whichever civilian arrangement is going to be in place after the elections take place, if they take place at the right time. Of course, between now and December, many things can happen.
Yes.
Again, the situation there is very volatile. You still have, groups and factions and countries who are not interested in seeing this kind of resolution bear fruit. So it will be a very critical period. I think it's important for countries like Egypt, like, again, Algeria, the major powers, the neighboring regional powers, to try and stabilize the situation there and ensure that the elections take place in time.
Yes, well, it has been also a volatile situation in Syria for many years, with a lot of focus from the international community there. Where do we stand now regarding the Syrian crisis, all the foreign interventions that were taking place there, the foreign players who are really operating on Syrian ground?
Well, I think for the most part, Russia won the show in Syria, really. For a while you had different countries trying to influence. You had Turkey, you had some other, countries from the region. You had Russia, you had the US, you had the Kurdish forces, you had Iraqi forces. It was really a big mashup of different countries and forces and so forth. But for the most part, Russia has emerged as the most relevant and powerful actor in the Syrian file. Today there are still pockets of resistance to the Syrian government. The Syrian government controls about maybe 70% or 75% of the overall area of the country, which is a major development, from 2 or 3 years ago. But there are still pockets, some pockets near the Jordanian borders, some pockets near the Turkish borders, that are still, hosting or housing some rebel troops or remnants of some of the rebel troops that are still fighting against the Syrian government. So these pockets are likely to remain for a while. But the main challenge really here in the case of Syria, like we mentioned also in the Gaza Strip, but maybe on a different scale, is the challenge of reconstruction, of reestablishing the power and the influence of the Syrian state and the legitimacy of the Syrian state over the various parts of Syria, or the Syrian population itself also, to return. A lot of immigrants are now thinking about returning and need to return to Syria because, after all, there's no actual need for them to be out of the country. Some of them do not want to return because of the benefits and other privileges they have where they are right now. But for Syria itself as a country to move forward, it's to stop the drain of human leakage, if you will, from its own borders, and build or rebuild this sense of legitimacy of a nation state that's moving forward.
Yes. Well, when we talk about the Arab League and the sort of political support it actually has for and provides for the Arab nations, but also part of it as well is the economic one. Now, the Egyptian Minister of International Trade, Rania Mashad, actually met with the new Secretary General of the Council of Arab Economic Unity, and they were talking about means of cooperation between both sides. And how do you see the future of such a cooperation, and how can Egypt really help the Council of Arab Economic Unity and also benefit at the same time?
Well, I mean, Egypt has a very long history of economic development, of knowledge in economic issues, many experts, many experiences, many plans, a long history ever since the 1950s and even from before. So here the technical know-how, expertise can really come from countries like Egypt. And not only Egypt, of course, we have other countries that have a long tradition in this field in the Arab world. But for Egypt to be playing this active role in the fund is very important. And also, at this point in time, again, when we are talking of some sort of a role for the Arab League has been, I mean, let's be honest, quite ineffective for a long time. But it's in these files, in these branches of the Arab League, like the technical branches, the economic units, the social issues, there is a huge room to be exploited, and a great role that can be played, and actually is being played by the Arab League in these files. So the fact that Egypt, through its ministers, is actively involved in with these funds and with something like the economic unit, it can only really benefit for the different Arab countries. We have countries in the Arab world that do need this kind of support, and like Somalia, for instance, like smaller countries that have been suffering for a very long time from conflicts and need economic support, and also the technical know-how, as we mentioned, of countries like Egypt. So hopefully this is only the beginning of a lot of positive results. Yes.
Well, one final question. We really need to shed some light on what's happening in Lebanon. Now, finally, there is a new government, and they are set to present a statement to the parliament, where President Michel Aoun said that he would like for this statement to also include the prospects of negotiations with the International Monetary Fund. They want to deal with the issues of fuel shortages, medicine shortages, really work on alleviating the sufferings of the Lebanese people who have really probably suffered the worst economic crisis in their history. How optimistic are you with the formation of this new government? He actually, Prime Minister Najib Mikati, succeeded where his two predecessors failed. Do you see a way out of this economic crisis facing the Lebanese people?
Well, that's. I think this requires several episodes. Yes. That is the last question, really. No, it's very hard. I mean, to be honest, to be optimistic with the situation in Lebanon right now. Najib Mikati, after all, is not a new face. He's been there before. He's been prime minister before, twice. And he's also perceived as one of the powers of the ancient regime. So it's not a very optimistic situation. I think it depends to a great extent also, as we said, with the situation in Palestine, on what the regional powers really are about to do in the coming period with Lebanon. Again, Lebanon is a country that's relatively small. It's been affected to a great extent by the conflicts and the rifts happening in the rest of the Arab world. So when there is increasing tension and polarization, this is only reflected also in Lebanon, because the different factions also, represent that or manifest that. In addition, you have Iran, which is a regional power and has a clear ally in Hezbollah in Lebanon, and it's also keen on gaining as many points as it could in this conflict. So it's a very delicate and very tense situation, and we don't know what will be the best. Of course, it will be a very critical test, really.
Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Fahmy shed light on many issues that are taking place within the Arab region, a lot of crises taking place, and really developments on all sides of the spectrum within the Arab world. And we understand that the Arab League is doing its utmost to really help be a backbone for the Arab nations. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this edition of the Daily Debate. But before we go, I'd like to thank my very distinguished guest, Dr. Mohamed Fahmy, the Professor of Middle East Studies at the American University in Cairo. Dr. Fahmy, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot. Always my pleasure.
Always a pleasure, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, please stay tuned for more coming up on Nile International. I'm Hani Saif. Thank you for joining us.